Determining the destination for the first of these birds and art tours was easy. My scholarly work had concentrated largely on German-speaking Central Europe. I loved Germany, but after a few months of it, anyone would long to get away. And my getaway was usually southern France. Better weather, less stress, better food, and birds, and art. And so I think it was 2005, I set up the first birds and art tour, which I based in Arles, the Provençal city founded by Julius Caesar as a place to settle his soldiers and veterans who he worried might prove obnoxious if they showed up in Rome with their weapons. The rice fields, the marshes, and the beaches south of Arles have been a favorite destination of birders for many decades. Generations of birders have gone there to see their first greater flamingos, their first bee eaters, their first rollers, the whole suite of colorful Mediterranean specialties. For my purposes, though, what mattered as much as the birds was the antiquity of the human landscape against which we saw them, and the way that so many of those sites could be brought into the foreground as we birded around them. It's a quick and easy drive to the great Roman aqueduct across the River Garn. The soul has not been born that can stand beneath or on this structure and not gape. But this monument of Roman engineering is also a great place to see little egrets and short-toed eagles and hoopoes and common redstarts and little-ringed plovers and a whole host of birds that are always new to lots of people in the group. Just north of Arles are the ruins of the Roman city of Glanum. We admire the ceremonial gate and the spectacular cenotaph erected by one of the city's noble families, while rollers and black kites fly overhead. And then we walk across the street, and we walk through the most famous olive groves in the world to the psychiatric hospital of St. Paul, where black redstarts hunt from the roof of the handsome little Romanesque church. European robins bounce along in this really lovely cloister, and the views from the barred upstairs windows are the same as those enjoyed by Vincent van Gogh during his residence here. This Provence trip remains one of my very favorite experiences, especially in years when Allison can get away to co-lead it with me. I ran that Southern France tour for the rest of our time in Arizona. In 2011, Allison was on the job market again. After finishing her PhD in 2006, she taught for a year at Emory, brown-headed nuthatches at the feeder. Then she spent 2 years at Colgate, common redpolls at the feeder, and finally a year and a half at the University of British Columbia, where the cackling of bald eagles was the musical accompaniment to our breakfast. Those first 3 years I remained based in Tucson. Allison came home for breaks, and I commuted to Atlanta and to Hamilton a couple of times each semester. That got pretty old pretty fast. So when she accepted the appointment at UBC, I moved to Vancouver with her, commuting back to our place in Tucson for lectures and workshops and the odd guiding commitment, or when the weather just got to be too much and I needed some desert. I enjoyed Vancouver a lot, and if our dog Gellert had just started laying golden eggs, we would have considered staying. But it's not the kind of place one can live comfortably on the income of a young academic and a bird guide. When Allison's time at UBC was done, to her great credit, she submitted another round of applications. I wouldn't have had the stick-to-itiveness at her stage, and I marvel at it still. I remember quite clearly telling her that the only way she could get me out of Tucson, other than feet first in a box, was if she got a job in New Jersey. She did. We sold our house to our good friends Mark and Lori from church. We pulled up stakes and we moved to Little Falls, then 6 months later to our place in Bloomfield, where we still are. Allison set about getting tenure, and I started staring at the ominously close deadlines I'd somehow agreed to in a couple of book contracts. She completed her task far more quickly than I did mine, but 2 of the books, Identification Guides to the Birds of New Jersey and to the Birds of Arizona, were finished on time, and the 3rd, a historical treatment of the sparrows of Canada, the US, and Mexico, finally appeared this spring, and it wasn't all that much more than a year past deadline, which in the world of bird book publishing counts as punctual. In the middle of it all, though, the birds and art model continued to exert its pull. 4 years ago, I signed on with Victor Emanuel Nature Tours, VENT, to conduct a Birds and Art program for that company, one of the big 30 of North American natural history tourism enterprises. Southern France, of course, remained the exemplar, but I would also bring with me 2 other Birds and Art tours that I've been running meanwhile, Tuscany and Catalonia. Tuscany arose out of the blue when I got a letter, a typed letter on paper in an envelope with a stamp from a young Italian ornithologist and birder who was looking for a way into the American market. I don't know how many inquiries he'd sent out to how many people, but a few months later, Allison, her brother, and I flew to Rome and met up with Marco in southern Tuscany to scout out a tour. This is Marco on the right. Marco has very little patience with the and art component of my Birds and Art tour. But he knows Tuscany like the back of his hand, and he's the 9th wonder of the world in making arrangements in a country that sometimes resists arrangement. We base ourselves in Monciano, in the heart of ancient Etruria, where cuckoos sing from 2,500-year-old Etruscan cemeteries, and every turn takes us to a Romanesque church that would be the most visited architectural landmark in any country other than Italy. The popularity of this tour inspired us to add a Venice and Ravenna itinerary. We stay out in the middle of the Venetian lagoon. We bird our way over to the ever more crowded city by private boat, and then we retreat to our peaceful agriturismo each evening. That Barcelona tour remains one of my favorite urban birding experiences. I usually run this one on my own with a group of 6 or 7. With a co-leader, my other tours go up to 12. We stay right across the street from the Ciutadella Park, and these lampposts in the park were designed by Antonio Gaudi. We go out each morning, we bird the park, then we make excursions out into the countryside to the monastery of Montserrat with its famous Black Madonna, to the Sagrada Familia, of course, which changes every year, and to the steppes of Lleida with their poppies and their little bustards. Best of all, though, for my purposes, are the remnant brackish marshes beneath the flight path of Barcelona's very busy airport, where we ponder the coexistence of Homo technologicus and an extraordinary range of rare wetland birds. This is perhaps the rarest bird I've ever found on a tour. This is a rosy starling, a bird of the Middle East and Eastern Europe, and it was in Barcelona in a parking lot one morning when we went out. That tour has gone over well, thanks in large part to the rosy starling, and we're just now adding a new northern Spain tour based in the shadow of Oviedo's cathedral, and co-led by one of Allison's multitudinous far-flung cousins. I just returned last week from a recent addition to my program, Birds and Art in Berlin. Berlin is one of my favorite cities in the world. It's different every time I visit. It's exciting, and it's excitingly wild. Berlin has 3 dozen wildlife refuges within its city limits. So we bird the remarkably bird-rich gardens and ponds of the Charlottenburg Palace, and in what I have to confess is a slightly contrived bit of serendipity, we visit Picasso's crane in the Berggruen Museum, and then we drive out into the countryside to witness the vast flocks of their living counterparts as they make the southward flight to Africa. I like this photograph not because it shows vast flocks, it shows only 2 birds, but because this is a parent with a young bird. The young bird still has a pale bill and lacks the head markings. And there's a certain tenderness here as these 2 prepare to fly the miles to Africa. New this year was Krakow in southern Poland. Krakow, of course, is perhaps the finest Renaissance city north of the Alps. Our best birding was just outside the city on fish ponds. And these fish ponds were dug 700 years ago on behalf of the local monastic foundations. But of course, there's plenty of art and architecture in hand too, from the Romanesque to the Art Nouveau, all of it just a few steps from our hotel, like the Gothic wonder of St. Mary's Church. I think that's enough to give you a sense of what is my here and my now. Doing things I enjoy, things that satisfy my curiosity about history and art and birds and literature and people. I've made no progress in understanding the how of it, and I would never presume to inquire about the why of it, except to tip my dorky birder's hat to Allison whose indulgence over 20 years has made it possible for me to let these things happen as they have. Let me end, as I usually end the day on my tours, with a mystery quiz. Everybody loves a mystery quiz. Who knows where this object is? I think. Who knows what it depicts? And who knows what it's supposed to mean? I know the answers to those questions, but for extra moral credit, maybe somebody can fill me in on who decided to put it there and why. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you.